Black Friday Sale Werewolf Freakout. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Back in 2021, there were a bunch of riots on Black Friday in various places all across the country. A lot of it got reported, but so much insanity went on that year that a lot of it slipped under the radar. I know this for a fact because that was the year that I saw a guy freak out and turn into a werewolf in the middle of a crowd of shoppers trying to rush into his store. You can be certain that story never made it to any newspaper or news show. This was in Wisconsin, so maybe that's why it didn't make the news. Although we've had other riots get reported on, so I don't know. Maybe it was just that nobody shot video and put it on Twitter or Facebook when it happened. It was all so sudden that I don't think anyone was able to get their camera apps turned on in time. I know in my particular case, I needed to get the heck out of the way of the creature. I was entirely focused on just surviving the incident. I couldn't think about luxuries like taking photographs to commemorate my being trampled underfoot, or under claw in this case, right? So I was with some of my friends, and we were in a growing crowd waiting to get into a Best Buy or something like that, which was having a Black Friday sale. I just wanted to save some money on a backup hard drive. That's all I wanted to do that day. Instead, I never got to buy anything because of that insane creature that invaded the crowd and nearly got us all killed dead. My two friends each have different opinions about whether it was a dogman or werewolf or what. Blevins says it was a werewolf because the dogman couldn't have snuck into that crowd of humans. My other friend Hartley, though, he says it was a dogman because no werewolf could be so big as this creature was that we all had to deal with. It was big. As big as a bear, I'd say. I've never had a bear pressing up into my back before, though, so maybe I could be wrong. I just know that I felt something warm and furry pressing into me, right? And I tilted my head back and I looked up. And I saw an animal head directly over me. Above me, you know? I'm just under 6 feet tall, so if I could see his head above me, then he had to be, I don't know, 8 feet? I'm just guessing here. He was probably even taller than that. I never saw anyone transform from human to wolfman on the one hand. And I never saw a 9-foot-tall beast man walk into the area in front of that store either. So I don't really know how the creature got in there with us. And I can't say that I know what the thing even was. All I know for sure is that it was there, right behind me. And that when it started pressing us all forward, all hell broke loose. My first instinct was to drop down and try to get away through the crowd. But I was too afraid that the creature would bowl over me from behind and trample the life out of me. So instead of dropping down, I took efforts to stand up as tall as I could. I sort of felt like a drowning person trying to keep my head above the water level. The top of my head never got so far up as the bottom of this creature's neck. It was more than a full head taller than I was. But it didn't really smell as strongly as you might expect an animal that large to smell. In fact, it didn't really have much of an odor at all, which seems strange in retrospect. Maybe that goes to support my friend Blebin's theory that it was a werewolf. After all, if a human takes a shower and then turns into a werewolf, he's not likely to smell like an animal, is he? But if that creature were a dogman, spending his life out in the woods, then he'd likely smell pretty strongly from living that kind of a lifestyle. Either way, what happened was that the creature pushed me forward into other people, and I cried out to them that I couldn't stop. People started screaming and panicking, and I felt like I might be about to be crushed. Some other guys, though, they joined with me, locking our arms together, and the bunch of us formed a human wall, where we pushed back against the big monster behind us that was pushing us forward. It took all the combined strength of the 4 or 5 or 6 of us just to slow that creature down. We were still being pressed forward. So how strong was that animal? It was the strongest thing I could imagine. Strong as an elephant, really. And then suddenly, something caught the creature's attention, and all of the pressure against us ceased. All at once, we went flying backward, each of us injuring something different from the others. I injured some muscles in my neck and shoulders when I landed, and I still feel it sometimes when I wake up after sleeping funny. I was too busy recovering from my injuries to see where the monster thing ran off to. Had I never got the backup drive I was there to buy. I think the only thing I bought that day was some aspirin or acetaminophen or something of that nature for my muscle pains. I suppose we all got off lucky though. It could have ended up being much worse for the entire bunch of us. Story number 2. My buddy turned into a werewolf on Black Friday. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got the craziest of all Dogman stories for you. My own friend turned into a Dogman in public, right in front of my eyes, and an entire crowd of Black Friday shoppers. This would have been back in the earlier 2000s. I'm going to say maybe 2002 or 2003. I don't even know if they called them Black Friday sales yet, but we had a mall where we would drive to that was having sales on the day after Thanksgiving that year. I went to buy records. I think they had music on sale. This was back when you still went to the store to buy music. Probably CDs, but I don't even really remember. We never got into that store anyway. So that part ended up not mattering. My friend we will call Joseph had told us that he was a werewolf ever since we were in 8th grade together. But we just humored him about it. He was the richest of us and he had the biggest allowance. So when he'd start to tell us that he had to go away to be locked up because the full moon was coming, we all acted like we believed him. None of us did though. I figured he did in fact have some kind of an embarrassing illness, but not actually werewolfism. I was guessing maybe VD or something like that. I don't know why VD would be tied to the full moon, but there you go, that was my guess. So this one time, when he came with us to that Black Friday sale at the electronics or music store, we didn't know how much it would stress him out being in that crowd. And in turn, he didn't know that stress could trigger his transformation. So when push came to shove, and shove came to pushing even harder, my buddy Joe started to gyrate and palpitate all over the place. Joe got bigger. He got darker, which at first I thought was his skin turning black as night. It was actually black fur growing out of his skin. He was getting bigger, furrier, more muscular. His face was extending out into something more like a dog muzzle. And when people started to notice this, they screamed, and they ran away in all directions. Not me though. I looked up at Joe in wonder. He really was a werewolf. This was the coolest thing that had ever happened. I started laughing and cheering as the chaos grew all around me. I looked up at Joe, and I could see in his eyes that he was not enjoying any of this. In fact, he was panicking, and he began making pathetic dog whining sounds. He looked just as scared as all the people around him. I grabbed Joe by the paw, and I led him back out of the crowd. Seas parted at our approach, and my main problem was keeping my excitable friend calm, as we walked through rivers of people all running into each other, while trying to get away from us. By the time we reached the car, Joe was nearly human again, and we stopped holding hands. Me and my other friends were jumping up and down and demanding that Joe transform back again into the werewolf while we could watch him. It took us some time to realize that he wasn't celebrating along with us. Joe was overcome emotionally. He was nearly crying as we ushered him back into the car and drove on out of that parking lot. It seems he had never transformed before except under the full moon. All of his ability to control the werewolf was based on knowing exactly when the attacks would come and how long they would last. Learning that stress could randomly set off transformations was a crushing thing for Joe to learn. It took away his ability to predict when it would happen, and it eliminated his ability to plan ahead. It also meant that he had to avoid high-stress situations from then on, which led to him becoming a far more withdrawn type of guy than he had been earlier. Joe's gotten into meditation, which seems to be helping him. I've noticed he seems more accepting of his situation and the random nature of the universe. He tells me that we each have challenges which erupt in our lives, and that although the situation is different for each of us, we can turn these hardships into the very same lessons and learn the same things that others learn around us. It's our choice whether to choose to be afraid of all these hardships, or if we use it to learn to become more mature because of them. So to him, Joe says, being a werewolf has been his greatest teacher of them all. Story 3. Thanksgiving Weekend Bus Ride Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I had a weird Dogman experience last Thanksgiving, or I guess it was the Friday or Saturday after Thanksgiving, really. I was riding the bus home from where my parents live these days in Vermont, back to Michigan where we were all originally from and where I still live. To be honest, I guess I should call this a werewolf story because I saw this guy before he became a Dogman, and he looked completely human to me. He wasn't a hairy unibrow guy or anything. He looked incredibly ordinary, and he came on the bus with his backpack. The only reason I noticed him was all the difficulty he had maneuvering himself and his backpack into a seat next to someone else. So it was hours later into the drive, in the middle of the night, when all of a sudden, the guy starts making these weird whimpering noises, and saying things like, "Oh no," and "not now." And then, all of a sudden, he climbs over the person next to him, leaving his backpack in his seat, and starts running up to the front of the bus. As he ran past me, I saw that he had what looked like a werewolf costume on, and a crazy over-the-top scared expression on his face. I won't lie, I burst out laughing when I saw him. I wondered how he had slipped into that mask back there in his seat. I thought it was some kind of a performance art moment or something. No one else besides me was laughing, however. That monster man ran to the driver and started shouting at him to stop the bus. The driver started reciting his prepared speech about how he was not legally allowed to stop except in designated places or whatever. And then that guy started screaming at him to stop. And he started slamming his fist into things, and women started screaming too. I couldn't see exactly what was happening, but the bus slowed down, and that front door came open. We never came to a full stop, but the guy in the werewolf costume jumped off the bus, and then the driver started pulling away. He just drove away and closed the bus doors as he did so. A lot of the passengers were screaming, and people were freaking out all over the place. Some were just waking up and asking what happened, while others were shouting about Satan and Jesus. It was not a very comfortable scene. The driver made an announcement that didn't really make any sense, but people calmed down a little afterward. I guess just because he had suggested that we calm down a little afterward. People started going through the werewolf's backpack, passing around his personal items. There was nothing in there about werewolfism though, as far as anyone could see. There was no Halloween makeup kit in the bag either. The person sitting next to him said they were sleeping and then suddenly a werewolf was climbing over them. So nobody really saw the beginning of the transformation. We argued about whether it was a trick or if it had really happened when the bus driver called out to us and asked for the backpack to be left up front with him. People groaned in disappointment, but we were not thieves, so we gave it all to the driver. There was ID inside, so would have had a better chance of getting back to the Wolfman through that driver than through any of us. Last year I rented a car and drove to Vermont with my sister. She was saying we'd probably run into the Dogman the whole way there and the whole way back, but such was not the case. Personally, I've had enough of that kind of business to last me a lifetime. And now we got a very special bonus story. Dogman on Fish Lake Road in Holly, Michigan. On June 1st, 2005, a repo man named Jeff Cornelius claims he came face to face with an angry dogman or werewolf on Fish Lake Road in Holly, Michigan. I grew up on a little gravel road called Fish Avenue in the Bronx, so I was curious and started looking into this case a little. Okay, here's Fish Lake Road, to the north and west of Detroit. I don't actually know the address of the incident, but when I punched in Fish Road, Holly, Michigan, Google Maps brought me here. It's a very countrified neighborhood, but there are retreats here and the Oakley, which is apparently a place you go to have a fancy wedding. So it's not like Deliverance. It is the country, but with some money, I guess. Let's go down to where Google Maps tells us to look, and wow, that's kind of a country road, isn't it? Not very wide. Is it paved? I think it's paved but covered in dirt anyhow, somehow. Wow, this looks like a place where you would run into the Michigan Dogman, doesn't it? I'm getting chills just looking around at it. Yeah, this is a dirty road. Something is running out of that dirty forest onto this road all the time. That's what it looks like to me. So let's go back in time to 2005. The witness Jeff Cornelius was trying to repossess a vehicle that he knew was owned by a resident on that road. He was driving by late at night, looking for this car. There was a locked shed that he thought might be large enough to hide the car inside of. So Jeff hopped out of his vehicle and was peeking into the window of the shack looking for the other one. Suddenly he heard a growling which Cornelius compared to the sound of a cappuccino maker. I think this is the sound he was comparing it to. Turning his head, about 75 feet away he saw a creature covered in thick, gray and black fur. It was standing on two legs and stood about 5.5 feet tall, but hunched over, so it would have been taller if standing more upright. It had dog paws, not hands, and they were held out in front of it in a threatening manner. The hind legs were not human legs. They were bent like canine legs are. It should be noted that this also means they did not resemble bear legs either. As soon as he caught sight of the upright monster dog, it tore ass directly at him. Cornelius ran to his truck and spun it around to shine the headlights at the creature, but it had run off into the night. Was this a dogman that Jeff Cornelius had seen? It was a full moon that night, so maybe it was a real-life werewolf. Maybe the owner of that vehicle he was looking to repossess was the one who chased him off. Jeff's co-workers laughed at him for even implying such a thing when he got back. But on the other hand, none of them was willing to take that job after he dropped it. Do you think that story really happened? Well, I think it actually did, and so did the late Linda Godfrey, who wrote it up in her book Real Wolfman, which we have a special link to in the description. She has a lot of other equally interesting cases in the book, and if you order from that link in the description, we do make a small commission back, so it helps the channel continue to stay online a little bit longer. And speaking of helping the channel stay online, here's Bigfoot to talk about today's executive producer. Biggie? I might sound like A Street Hawker, but I'm shouting all about Godzilla Tim Walker. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer Godzilla Tim Walker, who made this episode possible. Godzilla is one of the coolest people in all of Ireland, and we wish we could thank him a lot more than we do. In return for all his help, he gets to see our secret uncensored stories, and other perks too. Story number 1. I can't always control my werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I was once on a camping trip with a guy who got drunk and violent with me. Out of nowhere, a big dog growled at him and got between us. I followed this large but very young dog into the woods, and he led me to a ranger station. The ranger helped me to get home and was surprised when I told him the dog was wild. He had assumed the canine was my pet because of the way it never left my side. When I told him I never had a dog in my life, not even when I was a kid, the ranger said, "Well, you got one now." This was how Caesar the giant dog came to be my best friend and protector. At first we lived together in my studio apartment, but that proved to be difficult for both of us. I had good luck as soon as I met Caesar though, and I was soon able to afford to move us both out to the suburbs. Where we live now is almost the country, really. We're at the edge of the burbs in an area I won't mention because I don't want to spook my neighbors. Nothing I've said so far is spooky, but trust me, I'm just getting started. Once we were out of the city, Caesar took to walking around on his hind legs. He was not yet 1 full year old, but he was already as tall as I was on his hind legs. Of course, within a few more months, he was taller than me, and taller than anybody. He stood eye to eye with me when on all fours by then. Now he's taller than I am, even down on all fours. He's a big fella, and that's not his fault. That was decided for him. The trouble is that what's played to him can sometimes seem like aggression to human beings, as in the case of some of my neighbors. So far, people still smile and say hello to me when I run into them in town, but part of that is that I no longer bring Caesar around where I expect people to be. Instead, I put him in the back of my van, and we drive to a local natural area. I let him roam, and I do my work using Wi-Fi when it's available, or I save things to upload an email once I'm back within range. I've got extra computer batteries and 3 different kinds of rechargers in the van, so I can usually keep working no matter how crazy it gets with Caesar. The strangest thing that happened with Caesar was the time that I woke up hearing glass breaking downstairs in the house. I whispered for Caesar, who usually slept on a rug on the floor near my bed, but he wasn't there. Creeping downstairs, I saw a dark silhouette of a muscular man standing and staring away from me at a window. Maneuvering around to get a better look, I saw that the glass in the window was broken, and I didn't understand why the burglar was staring at the window that he must have broken to get into the house. It was quite disorienting when I heard the big man growl. I realized that was not a burglar. That was my dog Caesar, who had somehow grown shoulders and seemed much more manlike than I had ever seen him look before. I called out to him softly, and he turned to face me, allowing me a view of the broken window, with a man trying to climb through it. When he was about halfway through, Caesar stopped looking at me and dove at that man, snapping at him and eliciting screams of horror and pain from the burglar. I called to him more loudly, and he pulled back enough to allow the man to escape. I called the police immediately and told them the entire story, including that my dog had drawn blood and that it might help them identify the guy. After the police brought the guy in, they told me that he claimed I was keeping a bear in my house and that he had been bitten by a grizzly. When I put a leash on Caesar and brought him out to meet the officers, they admitted they might have thought they were being bitten by a grizzly too. I felt very proud of Caesar that the cops fussed over him. I also felt frightened of him for the first time though, because none of those officers even asked to step foot inside the house. They all seemed too respectful of Caesar's space to do that. And if those big men were afraid of him, I wondered if maybe I should start to be as well. It's kind of a cliche about dogs chasing mailmen, but that's actually what really brought all this to a head. Caesar got out and chased the mailman, and the guy had to go to the emergency room, claiming he was having a heart attack. I'm sure it was a panic attack, but I still feel badly about what happened. He's saying he's going to get my dog put to sleep, and I'm not sure he can actually do that. Of course, it would take an army to bring Caesar down, but it's not like it would be impossible. So I feel like I need to move if I'm going to keep this dog, but I'm already living out by the woods as it is. Where else am I going to go? The moon? Alaska? Of course, if I lived alone, I would have so many more options than now. But could I ever live alone again? It would sort of have to be Caesar's choice, wouldn't it? I'm pretty sure that if I drove him out to the woods and left him, he'd get back home before I did. My car has its own Wi-Fi, so one of my friends suggested to me that Caesar and I could go on permanent camping vacation, living in the woods full time. I expect this would work for Caesar, but I find camping tiring. I need to sleep for 2 days when I come back from camping. It would be a very hard lifestyle in my opinion. Personally, I would rather have a house or apartment. And really any place Caesar goes, he's in a position to cause trouble, for himself and for me. He has his own sense of justice. He stopped that man from attacking me when I first met him, and he's been my protector ever since. He just comes from a point of view that all male men are evil, that's all. He can't help it. He is a dog. Most of the time, anyway. I know that it's not only human beings who can become werewolves. I have seen my Caesar grow up into a grizzly-sized monster of a creature, ready to tear a man's face off if he dared intrude on our space. I have seen him develop wide shoulders when he needed them, when he wanted to turn that would-be burglar away. He's not an ordinary dog. He's not even an ordinary giant dog. He's Caesar, emperor of all dogs, and at least for now, he's my protector. Story number 2. I can't control my werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I let my best friend in the world go fend for himself in the woods of Wisconsin because I can no longer control my pet werewolf. It was foolish of me to take him in. Well, that's not true. I really didn't know what he was when I found him alone while hiking in the Gwynn State Forest area in northern Michigan. But when he proved to be too violent to be around other dogs, and when his paws started to look more like little clawed hands every day, I should have become suspicious. When he started walking on his hind legs and opening doors by himself, I shouldn't have laughed and encouraged him. When my girlfriend left me in a fight over this dog, you would think that might have awakened me that something was wrong. Besides, I should have been documenting all of this since the beginning. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. I probably could have donated him to science instead of letting him roam wild, if I had been more alert about all of this from the start. By the time Mikey became too violent, I really had to make a move quickly. I had to take him someplace where he could live his own life. I didn't have time to research different organizations to find out if he would be treated humanely or merely dissected and experimented on. I feel as though if I had been documenting his growth from puppy to man thing, I could also have gone public about him when I donated him to science. If people knew about his existence, then whatever organization I gave him to would have been more motivated to treat him well, and also to keep the public up to date as to his condition and state of being. But I didn't, though, and I suddenly found myself terrified of him. Although this situation progressed rapidly downhill once it started, it wasn't literally overnight. I would say that Mikey and I were still friends about 2 weeks before he began to get out of control, and that each day after that, he saw me less and less as another person, and more as just food, or an obstacle to getting food. I felt like he was going to finish me off the next time he randomly got angry at me, and I was very scared of him in those last few days. I got a tranquilizer rifle, and we loaded it with enough to take down a bull moose. And then we carried Mikey into the back of my friend's pickup, and we took off, speeding past every speed limit on every road we drove on. I don't want to say where we intended to leave him, except that it was up in one of those forests in northern Michigan. We didn't get that far, though. It was just a little bit north of Crandon and Matonga Lake, when a motorcycle cop pulled us over for speeding. We pulled off the road to the right side on Wisconsin 32 heading north, and the cop pulled his bike off just behind us. While we sat there waiting for him to walk over to us, Mikey woke up in the truck, and he stood up on his hind legs to have a look around. Well, when Mikey saw that cop, he was thinking he saw lunch, and he chased that police officer back to his motorcycle. I saw that officer drive the wrong way down the highway, with my oversized former pet chasing him. It was only a 2-lane highway, so when traffic came, the cop steered over back into his lane, and old Mikey ran off into the woods to the side of the road. My friend hit the gas and got us out of there, and that was the last I've heard of Mikey, at least so far. I've heard plenty of stories about dogs finding their way home over hundreds of miles of distance, but I'm kinda hoping that Mikey finds enough game where he is to stay wild and free. I hope he develops instincts to stay away from human habitation. I hope he finds wild areas to stay in. For him to walk back to where I live would mean marching through suburban land or even some cities. I think something terrible would happen to someone long before he got back to my part of the state. I hate to even think about it. I truly hope Mikey finds his home in the wilderness. Where he ran off was near the Crandon Ribbed Fen State Natural Area, the North Otter Creek State Natural Area, and other hotspots like that. He'd be much better off staying up there than coming back to see me. And I hope he realizes that for himself. Because I can't control my werewolf. Story number 3. I can't always control my werewolf transformations. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have pursued occult studies since the time I could begin reading on my own. I wanted to learn to have powers over other humans, and I would say that for the most part I have failed in that endeavor. However, I did succeed in turning myself into a werewolf, if you can call such a result a success. Don't worry, I'm not going to get your channel in trouble by explaining the exact procedures involved, but I did eventually find myself becoming something other than myself under the full moon. It was nothing like what I had ever been told about being a werewolf before. In the earlier transformations, I did not see myself change, but others did. I thought it was a joke at first, when all of my 5 friends who were over my place to rewatch our favorite old movie started saying that I was wearing a werewolf mask. They were asking me what it was made of, and I was giving them sarcastic answers, since I felt like I was being left out of an in-joke. I looked at myself in a mirror, and I looked old and tired, but not furry. Then there was another night when I was walking home from the store, and 2 different people on 2 different blocks screamed and ran away from me. I looked at any reflective surface I walked past for the rest of the way home, but I still looked like myself as far as I could tell. So there was no way it could be people pranking me any longer. This wasn't just something my friends were doing. This was something genuinely strange that was happening right after I had gone through ceremonies and procedures, asking to turn myself into a werewolf. Whatever was happening, I felt that it had to be directly related to those rituals and so forth. Then came another night when I woke up realizing I was on a branch of a tree, 20 or 30 feet up in the air, reaching into a hole in the tree, trying to grab a squirrel that was furiously nipping at my hand. What the hell was I doing? I had to climb down, and I suddenly remembered how afraid of heights I can be sometimes. I eventually managed to tumble to the ground clumsily without injuring myself too badly, but I felt very alarmed because I had no memory of how I got myself into that situation. Next, I set up a camera by my bed to record myself while I slept, but I never seemed to change while sleeping from that point forward. The trouble with that is that now I have blackout spells and I wake up in all sorts of weird places. I miss appointments and I can't explain why. I brought this all upon myself though, because I wanted to be a werewolf. It wasn't inflicted upon me against my will. I did this to myself. I don't think I really understood what I was getting into before I got into it, and I'm pretty sure I'd at least try it in a different way next time. So my advice to you, no matter what kind of werewolf you're trying to become, and no matter what tradition you're following to make the change happen, give yourself 2 years to research and learn first. Don't jump the gun on making moves to become a werewolf until you're a complete expert on werewolves. Don't be like me. I know I did something wrong, and I know this could have been prevented if I had more patience with my studies of lycanthropy. I feel certain that I would have had far more control over my life if I hadn't jumped into this in such a wild and unprepared fashion. That's not to say that I didn't study the subject or that I'm not studying it now. It's just to say that I looked into this all for less than a year, probably less than 10 months now that I'm doing the math in my head. I was full of myself, and I thought I was an expert already, but an expert wouldn't have created the situation that I have created for myself. I don't really know what I should or can do, because I can't always control my werewolf transformations. Real Wolfmen, True Encounters in Modern America. A lot of the stories we run on this channel are supposed to be true, but it's not like I have budget or time to look into any of the claims made. Someone who made her living looking into Dogman claims, though, was the late great Linda Godfrey. If you like the stories on this show, then you should check out this incredible audiobook from Linda called Real Wolfmen, True Encounters in Modern America. Linda goes back to the 1930s and tells a number of the better researched Dogman and werewolf stories of the 20th and 21st centuries. It's a great overview of the subject matter, whether you're new to it, or even if you think you know all the stories. It's available in audiobook, audio CD, paperback, or Kindle forms at the address in the description for this video. The audiobook is over 8 hours and is probably the best deal there. Plus, if you use the link in the description, supposedly you're helping us out here in some way that I'm still learning about. And now here's your old pal Bigfoot with an important message about today's executive producer. Please join me in thanking John, cause with Dogman he's always on. Tonight's episode is brought to you thanks to John Smith, who is a member of our PayPal subscribers club. That means he gets to see our secret uncensored Dogman and werewolf stories, of which we are putting out 2 this weekend. Or maybe 1 today and the other Monday, not sure, but you get the point. We do 4 a month, usually on Sundays, but I was sick last week, so we're catching up this weekend. Welcome to Scary Stories. Even in a year as evil as 2023, we all have something to feel grateful for on Thanksgiving. This year for me, it's that I finally feel well enough to read you a short, scary Dogman story today after some days of not being able to concentrate enough to get an episode out to you guys. It is going to be a short one, but hopefully we'll get longer tomorrow for Turkey Day. I've got a really scary one I hope I can get done in time for tomorrow. I'm going to have to stay up late tonight working on it, but I'm homesick anyway, so there you go. For tonight, I've got a rare New York State Dogman story. And what's even more rare is that it comes from a somewhat reputable source, and that I read about this encounter in the late Linda Godfrey's book Real Wolfmen, which you can still snag at the link in the description. If you use that link, we get a commission, so it helps the channel. And they have paper, Kindle, or audiobook versions of the book at that link. So she does not give a year where this is said to have happened, but she does give us 2 full names, George and John Carper. Now these 2 young men were returning south on Route 87 from a long day of fishing. They had Lake Champlain somewhere off to their left and the Adirondack Mountains somewhere off to the right, when suddenly they noticed they had company on the lonely upstate highway. It wasn't another vehicle, however. It was 2 upright canine fellows, both with very dark fur. The 2 men observed the 2 dogmen as they ran alongside the highway, looking like 2 black wolves who ran on their hind legs, instead of all 4. The creatures had tall ears up on top of their heads, not unlike German Shepherd dogs, but they were darker than German Shepherds, and they seemed to be mixed in some way with humans, judging by the way they were running on their hind legs. The Carpers estimated that the creatures stood between 6 and 7 feet tall, with one taller than the other one. Could they have been a male and a female? A parent and an offspring? The brothers didn't have time to study them enough to find out, because suddenly the creatures ran in front of them on the road, nearly causing an accident. The 2 young men couldn't do anything but sit there slack-jawed as the 2 dogmen ran right across the southbound and then northbound lanes of Route 87, running off into the trees in the direction of Lake Champlain. Now I bet all of you, or at least most of you out there, know about Lake Champlain. You probably also know that Lake Champlain is said to have a lake monster living in it that has been nicknamed Champ by the local tourism by children everywhere. What you might not know is that before Champ was a household word, the late great John Keel noticed that Lake Champlain Like Loch Ness? Like Jefferson County in Wisconsin? Like Point Pleasant in West Virginia? Like Skinwalker Ranch on the TV? Just like all your favorite weird places that people experience strange phenomena at? Lake Champlain seems to be a window area. What is a window area? Well, it's a place where inexplicable things happen and strange impossible animals and people are seen. Did you know that areas in which people see lake monsters are also more likely to be the locations where UFOs are seen, or ghosts, or Bigfoot, or Dogman? Because it's true. No matter what Dr. Jeff Meldrum might desperately want to believe about relic hominids and all that, if a location is known for sightings of one kind of strange phenomena, it is probably also going to be a place where people see other strange stuff as well. So, when this upstate New York witness report ends, with the werewolf couple running across all lanes of traffic to make a beeline for Lake Champlain, I don't suppose we should be all that surprised. Remember, you can read all about this true Dogman sighting in Plattsburgh, New York, in the chapter entitled Lake Champlain Joggers, in Linda Godfrey's book Real Wolfmen, which we will link to in the description. If you use that link, it helps the channel, so please consider it. Next time, I hope we're going to have an animated episode for Thanksgiving, or for Black Friday if it takes too long to make. It's a family legend sent into us about a man whose mother told him that he carries recessive werewolf genes in his blood. It's also a story about a feast, so I figure that makes it a Thanksgiving story. Wish me luck getting that one done on time. And now here's Bigfoot with today's executive producer, Biggie. The nose it knows, and the fingers they do fing. Dear S.A. Rose does the executive producer thing. Please join us in thanking S.A. Rose for making this episode possible. S.A. is a top-tier member of our PayPal subscribers club, which you can join at peterbernard.com. If you don't want to use PayPal, you can join us here on YouTube. In either case, you gain access to our secret uncensored stories and secret surprises. Like we just shared images of a naked female werewolf that Midjourney didn't censor for some reason. I'm not sure I can share that on YouTube. I mean, would that be human nudity or canine? It's a good question, I don't know. Jefferson Square of Weirdness. Welcome to Scary Stories. People seem to respond positively to our recent episode about the strange and unique Dogman sightings by Mark Shackleman from 1936. The story was a Shackleman family secret until Mark's son Joe revealed it all to Linda Godfrey 6 decades later, in the 1990s. In that episode, we examined the newspaper obituary of the son Joe Shackleman, who it turned out was a locally famous journalist, known for publishing investigative pieces about crime bosses. He had a reputation for honesty and had won awards for his investigative journalism. And he had no qualms at all about excitedly contacting his fellow journalist, the late Linda Godfrey, when he saw her on television along with a drawing of the Beast of Bray Road. He then spilled the beans about his father's 1936 sighting of a werewolf-type dogman who scratched at the earth on the top of an ancient burial mound and uttered the word Gadara at the father, Mark Shackleman, who was working as a night watchman at the time on the grounds of the St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children in Jefferson County, Wisconsin. The case may be the first famous 20th century Dogman sighting on the one hand, but it's also got a lot of spookiness all around it. Could it have been a sighting of a previously unrecognized hominid or upright walking canine? Well, I can't say it would be impossible, but the entire story seems somehow stranger than that. The beast appears on a sacred native burial ground. Both the Shacklemans were devoutly religious. The creature says a word that is also the name of a location of one of the strangest stories in the Bible. A story in which Jesus was said to have exorcised multiple demons out of a man or men who had been living in the crypts among the dead. It doesn't just feel like a sighting of an out-of-place animal to me. Of course, I used to be a member of the New York Fortean Society, and I got to be friends with people like John Keel, the journalist, writer, comedian, and stage magician who coined the term window area in the first place. He used the term to refer to places where not one, but many strange things happen. Like Skinwalker Ranch, for instance, if you follow any of that. They do tell a few stories that sound to me like Dogman or werewolf stories from that ranch. But there's also video of UFOs, stories about disembodied voices, dangerous glowing orbs of light that can kill, and all sorts of other inexplicable stuff. Heel had noticed that if you go to an area where something strange was reported, you often find any number of other strange cases from that same place. He had gone to Point Pleasant, West Virginia to investigate UFO sightings, or UFO as he used to say. He came away with the Mothman prophecies, which is certainly not what he had gone there to write. My other friend from the old 14 Society days, Tim Beckley, used to tell me how he would ask open-ended questions to let the witness steer the conversation. Like one time he heard there was a big UFO sighting in an area near where he was, so he drove to the neighborhood, then started ringing doorbells. He would explain he was a writer from New York who wrote about strange phenomena, then ask if they had seen anything out of the ordinary recently. He never mentioned UFOs, so that he wouldn't be leading them on. One person took him around to the side of his house, pointed at a leaking air conditioner up on the second floor window, and told Tim that a Bigfoot would come by sometimes in the warmer evenings and drink the water leaking from the air conditioner. If Tim had asked the guy to tell him about UFOs, he never would have gotten that crazy, but apparently very true Bigfoot story. So I shouldn't have been surprised when the chapter after the one about the Gadara werewolf from 1936 in Linda Godfrey's book Real Wolfmen, which you can buy at the link in the description, it helps this channel out if you do that, started off with a quote from John Keel himself explaining what happens near window areas. From time to time, the playful inhabitants of that other world climb through the curtains in the areas we call windows, and they stalk us to drink our blood and create all kinds of mischievous beliefs and misconceptions in our feeble little terrestrial minds. That's John Keel from the Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings. So although we might know Jefferson County most for the Shackleman family Dogman story, that doesn't mean the weirdness stops there. I mean, this place has been marked off as special since ancient times. This is where Aztalan State Park is, which used to be a Native American fortress with its own flat-topped multi-layered mound that still stands to this day. Aztalan isn't far from Rock Lake, which is famous, or infamous, for a number of reasons. It's rumored to have small stone pyramids or teepees at the lake bottom, but the water is so dark and murky that nobody so far has proven or disproven that legend. Rock Lake has also been said to have a monster living in it, like a local Wisconsin Nessie. I remember talking with Keel about Loch Ness. He kind of felt as though the loch had an underwater window in it, like a portal or opening between realities or maybe time frames. This would explain why the creature would seem very real and very solid to people sometimes, but then go missing when being searched for later on. Linda Godfrey makes a strong argument for the square-looking Jefferson County to actually be not so much the home of a species of werewolves, but possibly more of a window area in which Dogman and all sorts of other cryptids waltz into and out of whenever they feel like it. Or maybe it's unintentional on their part. Maybe it's more of a David Paulides missing 411 thing, with the creatures walking into our reality without knowing they're doing it. Well, I suppose it could be a bit of both, couldn't it? So let's go down the list of weirdnesses that Linda Godfrey gathered for Jefferson County, and then by the end you can tell me if you think this is a window area or portal area, or not. Well, let's start off with Paradise Road. Now, Paradise Road doesn't sound so heavenly to me. It's known as a haunted road according to Linda Godfrey, and she received one report from Paradise Road of a creature that the witness described as demonic. It stood on the ground off the road, and it was man-sized, but it was a bird, and had large red glowing eyes. Does that not sound like a description of the West Virginia Mothman? It does to me. I know I would have kept driving, that's for sure. I believe I should note here that Paradise Road is 10 minutes away or 13 minutes away from St. Coletta's, depending on whether you go north of the Big Swamp or south of the Big Swamp. Either way, that area is dominated by a big spooky swamp, and it seems to me that there's always a swamp or two in any window area, isn't there? Now another big spot over there is State Highway Wisconsin 106. Route 106 is haunted too. But the creatures that haunt this place seem more like Bigfoot or possibly Googway Dogman to me, from the way they're described in Godfrey's book. Let's list off a few Route 106 encounters and sightings over the years. 1972. A woman saw a large hairy biped on her farm. Soon afterward, her horse was attacked by some kind of a predator. Godfrey says that the story was backed up by an agent of the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources who vouched for the credibility of the witness. Skipping forward to 1980. A fisherman named Ronald Nixon was fishing in the Bark River south of Route 106 when he said he got stared down by some kind of a hairy two-legged animal on the other shore. 1992. Tom Brichta and Chris Maxwell see a hairy biped on Route 106, again just outside of Fort Atkinson. When you look at the map over there, it's all farmland and some houses. When they talk about seeing the creature walk out over into a tree line, I see only one patch of trees, and that is just immediately east of the town. If the creature were crossing there, though, it would be walking in the direction of some big swampy areas. In fact, it would have been heading down toward the Adam Birding Conservatory, the Prince's Point Wildlife Area, and of course the Bark River, where witness Ronald Nixon said he got stared down by a big hairy biped in 1980. In 1993, a fellow named Andrew Hurd encountered what he called a Bigfoot inside his family's barn near Hebron, Wisconsin. I'd be like, "Sorry to disturb you in your barn, Mr. Bigfoot, sir," and then I'd get out of there. 2005. A guy named Eric Binney and a friend saw a weirdly large four-legged canine with glowing yellow eyes, this time just south of Jefferson on County Road N. 5 years after that, July 15th, 2010, a middle-aged woman who chose to remain anonymous said she saw a Bigfoot crossing Route 106 in broad daylight at 4 p.m. Again, it was walking down toward the Bark River area. And Linda Godfrey notes that this is just where there used to be mounds which were done away with in earlier times to create more farmland. Maybe those mounds, or whatever they were actually there to mark, are still there, at least for those with eyes to see. Speaking of which, have you ever seen that channel on YouTube called The Archivist with Analog? I don't know if his theories hold water or not because it's not my area of expertise, but he thinks that the mounds actually marked entrances to some kind of transportation system, possibly a tunnel system. But I'm thinking, what if they marked entrances to window areas or portals? We know burials were made in the mounds, but was that their original purpose? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe you know more than I do. And if so, please share what you know in the comments. There's another aspect to locations like this in which so many different bizarre phenomena seem to exist next to each other. There's no way that many large predators could survive together in such a small area. And how would the population breed? Where would they live if they did? Certainly not in the farmlands of the Midwest. Even inside those swamps, there isn't enough room for so many beastmen. Unless those swamps or the areas around them are actually more like doorways, letting things in and out that don't really belong here with the rest of us. There was a reason John Keel was respected, even by geniuses like Jacques Vallée, who he is shown here with. The one time I got to meet Vallée, he and I spoke of John Keel. Vallée worked for the CIA along with Ingo Swann back in the day doing a remote viewing at the Stanford Research Institute. He was then, after that, one of the people who created the internet. Vallée said at that event I attended with Tim Beckley some years back that the conscious universe seems to function like an internet search engine. You put in some kind of an address, or a description of that address, and the search engine finds whatever it can that seems to match what you're asking for. Sometimes that address is in the past, or the present, or the future, because as it turns out, all of it is happening at the same time. Wait, did that just make sense, or was that gibberish? I'm not sure why, but I think there's some kind of an answer to all of this, in that gibberish I was just uttering. Then again, maybe it was just gobbledygook after all. But what isn't gobbledygook is our special executive producer tonight. Here to tell you all about her is Mr. Bigfoot himself. Biggie? She is strong and never falters. Tonight's EP is Ginny Walters. Please join me in thanking the kind and generous executive producer of tonight's episode, Ginny Walters, for donating to us using the thanks button on YouTube. Thank you, Ginny. Weird Wisconsin Werewolves. Welcome to Scary Stories. Today we're going to highlight a special town in Dogman and real werewolf history, and that is the town of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Everything to follow in this episode is something that a witness reported to an author or journalist. That doesn't prove it's true, but let's just say that people in Eau Claire sort of seem to expect odd things to happen. It's in that region of Wisconsin that was once covered in conical mounds left by very ancient people too far back in time for even American natives to be able to tell us their origin. Everywhere those mounds were, and wherever they still remain, people see upright walking canids. People see strange lights. People see what they perceive as ghosts. It's a pretty intense thing once you start to look into it. Fortunately for me and you, most Wisconsin folk are proud of their state's spooky and weird side, so a lot of info exists online, even on tourism websites. First, I'd like to go into two daytime Dogman sightings that happened very close to each other, in the suburban town of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Now, these are not your ordinary cryptid sightings. They're both a bit off. The first was in 2003, and the next was 5 years after that. One happened in a home on Cameron Street, and the other not very far from Cameron in someone's backyard. Both of these sightings were documented in Linda Godfrey's book Real Wolfmen, in the chapter entitled Black Hellhounds, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. It's May 2003. A young man sleeps in late until 2:30 in the afternoon. He gets up groggily, squinting at all the bright sunlight of the afternoon flooding into his home. He wanders into his bathroom and closes the door to do his morning business. When he's done, he opens the door, and there is a large form blocking his way. It was a black-furred dogman, taller than he was, and it was blocking him from being able to leave the bathroom. The man estimated that the beast man must have weighed 300 pounds or more, but then he noticed that the creature seemed partially translucent, like Casper the Unfriendly Dogman. Its chest and arms were not furry. They were dark-skinned and muscular, with the skin exposed all over. His head, however, was that of a canine, with bright yellow eyes that stared directly at the witness. It was muscle-bound and clawed, quite an imposing figure. This was a dog-headed man in the truest of senses. The young witness, who chose to remain nameless when reporting this to Linda Godfrey, turned around and grabbed a baseball bat, which he for some reason had in his bathroom, and he turned around to face the creature. But the werewolf merely looked somewhere else, and then ceased to be there at all. It just blinked in and then blinked out. Like a TV transmission, sort of. Weird, huh? When people have hallucinations after waking up from dreams, it's called a hypnopompic hallucination. I suppose it's possible that this young gentleman was not fully yet awake, and that he vividly imagined a large dogman or werewolf blocking his path, even though it was bright daylight at 2:30 in the afternoon. But then how do you explain this next story, which happened nearby? Godfrey doesn't tell us where on Cameron Street in Eau Claire the first man lived, but she tells us that the second man lived close by the first, for what that's worth. It was 5 years later, in 2008, when that second man contacted Linda Godfrey to tell her that he had seen a creature that looked the same as that 2003 one, although he called it brown and not black. He saw it moving around in a sneaky fashion between his truck and the garage. The man compared the creature's movements to those of a ninja and said that it quickly disappeared from his sight. Rather than being frightened of the entity, though, as the first man had been, this guy wondered if it were some kind of guardian spirit looking to protect him in some way. That's the first time I've heard of someone interpreting a dogman visitation in that way, but there you go. The city of Eau Claire is a very unique place. The local tourism board has a page set up to guide ghost hunters to some of the better haunted locations in town. The downtown Milcon Theater in Eau Claire is said to be haunted. Another theater whose name I can't pronounce at the college in Eau Claire is haunted. Fire station number 10 is haunted. Of course, the location of the torn-down asylum is haunted, I mean, duh. It's not that large a city, but it's got a lot of weird history in it. Just before Halloween this past year of 2023, Eau Claire's local TV station WQOW ran a story on the Beast of Eau Claire, which they claim is a large black dog with glowing red eyes. The March 19, 1908 La Crosse Tribune describes a black beast thought to be a panther that killed cattle and stalked a farmer's son in Eau Claire back during that year of 1908. A panther is not a dog, and a dog is not an upright werewolf. But Eau Claire has been a place where people have reported strange and deadly animals, which seem to have a supernatural edge to them, for well over 100 years. WQOW quotes Chad Lewis in the Wisconsin Road Guide to Mysterious Creatures, describing two different sightings of the creature in the early days of the 21st century. So let's go through those two sightings. It was 2001, 11 p.m. A woman is driving on Highway 37. She said that when she saw the red eyes of this big black canine beast, she became filled with a fear that was quite out of the ordinary for her. It doesn't seem she thinks this was an ordinary animal. 1 year later in the same area, a different woman claimed to Chad Lewis that she saw the beast off of US Highway 53. So this was not a one-time phenomenon, to be certain. Is this the same thing appearing in different forms? How many haunted beasts can exist in one small area of Wisconsin? Until one is captured or killed, we may never know what kind of being the creature really is, Chad Lewis wrote. But is such a thing even possible? Do these creatures exist in the same way that you and I do? Or are they only temporary visitors to our world in one sense or another? Could they be interdimensional travelers through John Keel's window areas? Or what about Rupert Sheldrake's theories of morphic resonance? Sometimes when he talks about the forms that living things can take already pre-existing, it reminds me of avatars in video games. Maybe changing forms isn't as complicated as we think, because we're still trapped in old-school linear thought patterns. When it comes to places like Eau Claire, Wisconsin, I'm just not really personally so sure what people are seeing and experiencing. But I know I would like to learn a lot more. If you've had any personal experiences in or around this haunted area in Wisconsin, please share what you know in the comments. Or if you've heard any cool stories about the area, we'd love to hear what you got to say. For me personally, this is a fairly new subject I'm just starting to really look into. So if you know more than I do, I'd be very interested in what you have to say. Speaking of interesting, some of the stories in tonight's episode were taken from Linda Godfrey's classic book Real Wolfmen. We have a link to get that book in either print or Kindle or audiobook versions. And if you snag it at the link in the description, you help our channel out because we get a small commission from each sale. And speaking about helping the channel out, it's time to learn about this week's executive producer. And here to tell us about that is that most Bigfooty of all Bigfoots, Bigfoot. Biggie? He's all love and zero hate. He's Ace Williams, 1978. Please join me in thanking Ace Williams, 1978 for making this episode possible. Ace is a member of our PayPal subscribers club, which means he got to see the 2 secret uncensored members-only stories that we dropped this past weekend. We also have another club here on YouTube with the same perks. And here to tell you all about both is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank?
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.